I think it would be safe to say that I came into this class as a blank slate. Despite being a graduate student within UT's landscape architecture program, I didn't have an extensive background in either the natural or social sciences. When I first thought about what urban ecology was, I created this cognitive map that showed where my mind was residing. In the clearest sense, I thought urban ecology was the study of plants and animals in cities. I thought it was primarily the green between the gray, the flapping of wings down an alley, or a moment of shade from a street tree. But as the semester progressed, I realized that, along with many other misunderstandings of what I thought urban ecology was, I was leaving one of the most important components out. Us. Early within the semester, we were asked to develop a definition of urban ecology, and I found that simply defining the term requires some informed thought. To begin at a more foundational level than even simply defining what urban ecology was, I thought it would bring more clarity to our scope of interest by simply defining both urban and ecology separately. As we look at ecology, we recognize that it's an interdisciplinary field that includes biology and earth science. And more precisely, it's the science of analysis and study of interactions among organisms and their environment. This can be broken down into the life processes, interactions, and adaptations of an organism, the movement of materials and energy through living communities, the successful development of ecosystems, and the abundance and distribution of organisms and biodiversity in the context of environment. Now, defining urban tends to be more of a challenge. Simply put, it is in, relating to, or characteristic of a city or town, but we must get further into what is a city or town. First off, urban is a physical manifestation of human growth. We see this when we fly over a city or look from a window atop a high building. This is the physicality of our buildings, roads, infrastructure, and human bodies that grow, span, and layer our cities. Second, urban is a measure of density. This can be density of human population, varying cultures, and even innovation. This helps to define the boundaries of different types of urban, such as city, suburb, or town. And third, perhaps the most obvious, yet the most difficult to define and list, urban is the interconnection of networks and their resulting relationships. These networks interact through infrastructure of multiple scales and forms, and their interconnectedness is constantly growing and changing. At this point, one can begin to see how ecology will undoubtedly link to the understanding of our cities and how the field of urban ecology might be shaped. So now that I establish an understanding of the constituent parts of urban ecology, now I can turn to the fundamental definition. As an integration of the theory and methods of both natural and social sciences, urban ecology looks to study the patterns and processes of urban ecosystems. Evolving conceptual frameworks for urban ecology view cities as heterogeneous, dynamic landscapes and as complex, adaptive, socio-ecological systems in which the delivery of ecosystem services links society and ecosystems at multiple scales. Now that I have a more informed understanding of what simply urban ecology is, I've been able to develop a new cognitive map. This collage, with less specificity than the first cognitive map, helps me think about the broader picture of urban ecology, the interconnectedness and dependency that exists within many systems. This also helps illustrate the sustainability triangle that exists within urban ecology's framework with regards to the interplay between society, the economy, and the environment. If we apply the ecosystem approach to urban areas, we can see that urban ecosystems are dynamic and that they have similar interactions and behaviors as their natural counterparts. But unlike natural ecosystems, urban ecosystems are a hybrid of natural and man-made elements whose interactions are affected not only by the natural environment, but also culture, personal behavior, politics, economics, and social organization. At this point, we can tell that this conceptual framework is one of great complexity, and thus there's contrasting views of how to organize, focus, and create the trajectory for this field of study. Some focus on the interdisciplinary approach of interaction between social and ecological sciences, while others focus heavily on the interface between science driving policy decisions and how that gap can be bridged. But personally, I feel that with environmental and ecological changes happening on all scales of scrutiny and at a pace that is unprecedented, what's most important is that we synthesize the information that can be brought to light from current entrenched sciences with the goal of creating a new urban ecological field of study. Speaking in support of this, Marina Alberti, a professor of urban and environmental planning at the University of Washington, she says to fully understand the interactions between urban systems and ecology, we'll have to redefine the role of humans in ecosystems and relationships between urban planning and ecology. She says that many classic geographic studies of cities, which offer valuable insights to ecologists, are based on outmoded ecological theory such as deterministic models of succession and assumptions of equilibrium dynamics of ecosystems. As a future landscape architect, I have been often asked to consider these topics relative to my discipline. I think we can say that planners, architects, and landscape architects may have similar visions of what is good or desirable in urban ecology, but when it comes to practice and output, it can, and often is, differing. Landscape architects look at landscape as their object, their slab of clay on the wheel, but the way they approach shaping this clay has been changing in more recent times, as there is a greater emphasis on applying landscape ecology and conservation biology to the strategic design of urban infrastructure. We look for ways to structure and guide the flows of organisms, materials, and energy that pass through a city in ways that support the characteristic biodiversity of a region. And from there, I think our design is our involvement. This stems from the combining analysis and composition to comprehend, critique, and respond to complex conditions. This can be kind of confusing, and at times it can actually be quite literal, but sometimes it can be a bit more poetic in the overall goal of shaping space to make place. With the hope of designing for culturally based placemaking, ecological literacy, and human and environmental health being primary goals. But I think where the challenge is, despite these very informed and noble goals within landscape architecture, there's the inevitability of the client and achieving the goals that they set forth for you. So I think it's a larger goal within the discipline to continue to emphasize these hopeful practices within the context of your client's expectations. With these overarching concepts of urban ecology and what it means to the discipline of landscape architecture, we'll turn to a particular project in Austin, Texas, that I feel approaches much of these considerations in urban ecology and gives us the opportunity to consider some of these ideas in practice. In 2012, there were 4 finalists for what is known as the Waller Creek competition. Waller Creek is a thin, urban riparian ecosystem that meanders from the northern part of Austin southward through UT campus and along the eastern edge of the downtown area before it finally meets Lady Bird Lake. Over the years, the creek has suffered from erosion, invasive species, flash flooding, and has been physically and culturally isolated from the city around it. With funding for the design project coming from a partnership between the City of Austin and the Waller Creek Conservancy, the competition's goal was to revitalize the downtown portion of Waller Creek. Lee McDonald, the executive director of the Waller Creek Conservancy, speaks to us further in saying that what we're trying to preserve is this natural space in the middle of the city. We want to create public access to this space, and we want to make sure that we have water and ecological functions restored. We want to make sure that the trees are cared for, and that the space is maintained as a real public park. It's one thing to put in some capital improvements, he says, but it's another thing to have long-term operation and maintenance money, and that's the kind of thing the Conservancy is offered. When the smoke cleared, Michael von Wachenberg Associates Incorporated came away with the win. MVVA said that Waller Creek is too long and its condition too varied to be resolved with a single sweeping design gesture. What was called for rather was a sensitivity to the particulars of the remarkably heterogeneous site. The MVVA team allowed the City of Austin, its citizens, and the creek itself to suggest a series of highly context-sensitive interventions. The resulting design concept expands a rejuvenated Waller Creek into a linear chain of parks, embedded in 5 connected neighborhood districts: the Lattice, the Grove, the Narrows, the Refuge, and the Confluence. Each district has a distinctive character, and together they give Austin a network of pedestrian bridges, new opportunities for sustainable development, an outdoor laboratory for urban ecology, and an iconic new music venue, the Poppy, at the creek's tunnel inlet. MVVA's design spans a large area, so for the sake of considering the corridor with an urban ecological focus, we will look with further detail into a particular intervention used to positively affect the creek ecology. The Waller Creek Tunnel project is constructing an underground stormwater bypass tunnel approximately 1 mile long and 22 feet in diameter, beginning in Waterloo Park and ending in Lady Bird Lake. The goal for this tunnel is to maintain constant water flow in the creek. During flood events, water would be bypassed and piped to Lady Bird Lake, and during times of drought, water would be pumped from the lake back into Waller Creek to ensure constant flow. Environmentally, this is a positive human effect on the creek ecosystem. The engineering of environmental consistency through water flow and the removal of invasive species will allow for growth and survival of flora and fauna. By diverting stormwater and therefore lowering the 100-year flood line, the tunnel has opened up approximately 28 acres of land that will be newly available for development. This will now be great potential for expanded hike and bike trails and additional amenities along the downtown creek. This area will have great potential for economic growth. And now downtown residents will have access to environmental and wellness learning by interaction with the creek. But there are also potential problems that can result from the development of Waller Creek. As space along the corridor becomes highly sought after and expensive, the speed of the already occurring gentrification in the city could increase, especially due to Waller Creek's close proximity to the east side of town. Also, engineering consistent water flow into an urban creek in a drought-prone part of the world falsely communicates the true dangers of water shortages that consistently plague Texas. But even sooner than the result of completed redevelopment of Waller Creek, there exist potential problems in its construction. To further this aspect, I interviewed Miley Moline, the founder and previous executive director for a nonprofit in Austin called English at Work. English at Work brings customized language lessons to non-English speaking employees at the workplace, with goals of reducing errors on the job, workplace accidents, and developing the literacy that's important for workforce interactions. This focus has brought a concern in English at Work for Texas construction workers.
Construction workers in Texas. They're a critical part of our economy. They're responsible for, if you think about what's driving Austin's economy right now as far as tourism, events and things like that. Our construction workers are a critical part of that. We owe so much to them, I feel like, to our construction workforce. I think that we know that every day a construction worker dies on a construction site in Texas. There's a disproportionate number of deaths that happen among Latino construction workers compared to the white construction workforce. If you've got an English-speaking supervisor and Spanish-speaking construction worker, there might be a problem in communicating about safety there. So if a construction worker notices that there's a hot wire or something like that, it might be hard for him to get that information to his supervisor. Another problem is the wage. Again, that the minimum wage in Texas is not a living wage. And so, for people who are busboys, hotel housekeepers, many construction workers, if they're only earning minimum wage, which is below $8 an hour in Austin, chances are they've got to get another job. That prevents them from participating in English classes for themselves. It prevents them from being as engaged as they want to be with their children's education, with their children's own health. So it becomes this terrible spiral of having to work too much and not being able to take care of the really important issues for themselves and for their families. I think my personal definition of what it is to work for social justice is to work to make the systems that hold opportunity for individuals and families to be more fair.
The information pointed out by Miley Moline are examples of things that I didn't take into account when I was first asked to define urban ecology. And early on, I never would have considered the gentrification that could take place due to the revitalization of Waller Creek. Yes, it is safe to say that urban ecology is about plants and animals in urban environments, but it's about so much more. And we, as human beings, play a leading role. Our economies, our societies, and the natural environment all come together in urban ecology. I think what I'll take most from this class, especially studying landscape architecture, is that every decision that I will make as a designer by influencing physical space can and will have a consequence. Now, they won't all be bad, but enough to take into account and confer with others about the best moves to make, and not simply about the outcome of the project at hand, but sometimes also about the process of seeing it to completion.